Welcome back. Continuing on with our handy dandy reading of Esoteric Psychology by the lovely Alice A. Bailey. And reading along on the publisher's website. For this chunk, I'm going to read from my book. Still sharing the screen for you, so let me pull that up now. And always links are in the description to read along on the publisher's website. For these sections, for the last two sections, for this section and the last one, I'm deciding to go over smaller chunks. We're going to unpack this paragraph here. I found that overall there really is just so much in each section that by covering less ground, it might actually cover more ground with the commentary. So we're going to try it this way at first for a while to see how these smaller sections go. I hope that you're doing well, and thanks again for watching. Continuing on from here on page 112 about learning to grasp the teachings. Learn to grasp the teaching correctly and see it for what it is. Some of it is written for a distant time, and the true significance of this treatise on the seven rays will begin to emerge as part of the general knowledge of humanity only towards the close of this century. This was written back in 1930s. Unless the imminent outpouring evokes greater change than is now deemed possible by the watching hierarchy. Here I wanted to unpack this word and just pause here for the naysayer in your life as you study this and learn to embody conscious teachings. When you read a book like this and they're talking about a hierarchy of watchers, individuals that watch over our growth and judge whether humanity is evolving according to plan, people have an immediate cognitive dissonance, we're talking about psychology, with this kind of term, right? Or that concept, or the non-religious person might. And that's fine. So we take this and we zoom out, like we talked about in the last section. What is a hierarchy? And I think that this was really cool because I looked this up in a sidebar earlier, and the first thing that came up was kind of the pyramid of Maslow's pyramid, which is the hierarchy of needs that we know in common psychology, where it talks about the journey up to self-actualization. And in order to reach that top section of the pyramid, one has to have their basic needs met, and then moving up to those things as they stack up against each other in that hierarchy of needs. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Physiological needs first, and I wonder if this is sharing on the screen. I hope it is for you. Let me see. I think so. So it says first we need our basic physiological needs met. This is food, shelter, safety, those basic instincts. I'm sorry, safety is right up above here. So physiological is what our body needs. The next realm up is we need our safety needs met. Then we need social belonging, sense of esteem, and then you can have what Maslow called self-actualization. So this is when you feel full and complete, all of your pyramid hierarchy needs are met. And then when you break down different aspects of society, different cultures, different locations, and things like that, where you see some of these things being not met down here, you see that people are less self-actualized, meaning less generally happy as human beings, because they don't have their basic needs met. If I don't know what I'm going to eat, if I don't feel safe, and then on and on it goes, right? So it's interesting here where it talks about hierarchy in that way, and then we go back over here and it says that there's a watching hierarchy over our development. If we look at it as terms of people, just different levels of consciousness, people, all of us living on this planet, billions of people, there are different people that are more actualized than others, you could say, and moving up that pyramid is also more conscious. The more actualized a person is, the more conscious they are, the more happy they are intrinsically, because they're leaning their ladder up against the right wall. Like, saying where they say people, you lean your ladder up against the wrong wall and you're just climbing it, trying to take certain jobs or just trying to make it by or do what's traditionally acceptable, and then you realize that you climbed to the top and you had it against the wrong wall. So the more a person is truly fulfilled or actualized, that means that they've been building themselves along the right ladder to reach that goal. And that's kind of what we're learning about here with the 7 rays and what those underlying things are that would make a person uniquely feel actualized themselves, unique to you, because what's fulfilling to another person isn't going to be fulfilling to the next. And that's something that we need to kind of identify and learn as part of self-awareness, group awareness, consciousness, is to learn what is meant for you and to stop trying to fit into cookie cutter definitions of happiness, because now it's becoming seen as something that's not actually graspable. It's not really seen, it's becoming more elusive, like a fairy tale, when in fact it's really something that is actually possible. And a lot of it comes from knowing yourself and staying in your own lane. So if we look at it that way, in terms of there's different people that are sitting back with different levels of consciousness, perhaps someone's watching and saying like, okay, because once you get more evolved too, you learn not to overstep or to step in or impede on someone else's process. If someone's not ready to hear a thing, you're like, all right, let them learn, right? It's that tough love. You're not going to push someone into their awakening, because we realize that that's not possible. Someone has to want it and they come and seek it. So this is where it talks about earlier. I think a few videos back, the Tibetan was talking about how what the teachings that you're looking for are what you're going to find. This is the same thing as like when the student's ready, the teacher will come. But in this terms, those at the top of the hierarchy, or those more conscious or more actualized, are watching the development or the play on the world stage of all the others who are less actualized. And this sentence is saying that the significance of these teachings from this book on the 7 rays will begin to emerge as part of the general knowledge of humanity towards the close of a century. So this is gradually happening when it's supposed to, right? We talked about the veil lifting in the last video. That has very much to do with different astrological movement of planetary bodies and different ages. People who don't believe in astrology, they believe in golden ages or things that we've learned about in history, but they don't understand that the astrology is what was behind those different ages, which I touched on in a video a while back as well. But further here it says, and unless, this part. So we're only going to learn it at the end of the century unless there's an imminent outpouring that evokes greater change than is now deemed possible by the watching hierarchy. So again, going back to the idea of the more actualized are watching, and by their estimation, you'd be like, it looks like there's a lot of people that are still not getting their basic needs met in order for a collective conscious uprising. So by our estimation, it's going to take, X, more trauma, more wars, more people behaving really badly for the masses to click and understand consciousness, to take consciousness seriously, which is spiritual development, which is living as a soul, which is living from the mind, the higher mind, not the logical 5 senses, very superficial mind, but an elevated state of consciousness, climbing up that pyramid of needs without necessarily possibly needing it in the way that Maslow deemed it in the past, because this is also about learning the problems of our current psychology and advancing it forward by learning the whole picture of psychology, which studies the psyche, which studies the soul, because the soul is the mind. So continuing on here, this sentence is interesting because it says that what we're studying is for a distant time. It's deemed for a distant time because those who are watching, the more actualized or more conscious folks who are watching over this plan unfolding, from their estimation, it's going to take some time. The only thing that's going to advance people is more time, unless the outpouring evokes more change unless enough people get it, unless enough people decide enough is enough, unless enough people decide, wow, we're making this a lot harder because we're allowing ourselves to be shepherded towards chaos based on circumstances of our environment, keeping us on those lower levels of the pyramid, keeping our ladders against the wrong walls. And what those things are is keeping people unaware of their true selves, with a capital S, of their connection to others, of what a soul is, of the importance of living as a soul. In fact, our reality is heavily pushing people towards the idea of losing your soul or selling your soul. So obviously it's going to take longer if we're pushing out these images and these depictions of what is desirable, of what is preferable in our society, as something that is in direct opposition to that which is going to make us actualize ourselves. So continuing on from here, some of the teaching is of immediate usefulness to all of you. Some of it will throw light upon the problems of modern psychology and link the many aspects of the science of the soul. Again, part of this is learning that there is a scientific element to the study of the soul. When we look at the soul for what it is, we've looked at it in past chapters, proof of the soul, what is the soul? And the science of the soul would be learning the many things that a person can do once they become soul conscious, once they become soul aware, once they elevate out of their personality consciousness, which we talk about, and which the 7 rays is all about, is learning those specific components and learning how to step into those different stages, because those are stages of development. Learning who you are is first step, is to learn your personality. But many of us just stop there. But this teaching says that there's more to learn and higher to go. And so there is a science to it, the science of the soul, in order to live as a soul, which it looks like we're going to get to in the next sentence or so here. Disciples grow these days by finding out the reservoir of their soul's nourishment. I love that sentence. I'm going to break this down too, piece by piece. Disciples grow these days by finding out the reservoir of their soul's nourishment. They will discover that the source of their strength is to be found in group teaching and in group endeavor. We are training men to live as souls and not as children to be nursed and cared for in a protected nursery run by rules and orders. As souls, men derive their life from the ocean of the universal and not from the tiny well of the particular. Carrying their little pitchers, they find their way to that ocean, and for themselves they draw into that receptacle that which they need. From this part here, disciples grow these days. And I love the analogy here of growing and water and pitchers and nursery. It's very much like plants, right? And we are very much like plants. We need the light to grow. And what this is saying, the light and the water is the emotions, right? The emotions, or the astral nature, everything that's welled up in us that can also fuel our passions and our inspiration and our all of these things in alignment with the light. Light is also enlightenment, information. Light is information that moves from being to being. So when our light is in harmony with our waters, it's the recipe for our growth right here in this paragraph. And these, how this is said, is really beautiful if you think about it. And I've been really getting into plants and wanting to actually not kill one and actually raise it and keep it thriving. And I'm learning a lot about it, and it's really fascinating. It's really empowering, but we, as above, so below, or as within, so without, we're like replicas of these things, and we need to figure out how we grow and how we thrive. And by understanding, plants and nature, it becomes very simple. So what we need to grow is to find the reservoir of our soul's nourishment. So when we learn about the soul, when we live as a soul, it can fill you up. It's something that's as vast as an ocean, is what it's saying. The ocean of the universal, and not the tiny well of the particular. If you talk about who the I am is, and you identify yourself in this very singular, this very pointed, this very physical version of truth from this very limited scope, I'm just a human being. And then you get attached to a lot of the toxic things people say. It's like, I'm only human, right? As an excuse for what you can and can't accomplish, or what you shouldn't, what standards you should or shouldn't be held to, or hold yourself to, for that matter. So, or the particular of, I am a painter, right? It's still a beautiful creative thing, but if you are an intuitive painter, or a painter that's driven from your soul's reservoir, you might not be just a painter that's looking for what kind of art is selling right now, and then just be the kind of person that just churns out this meaningless stuff. You're going to work from an intuition, and maybe your paintings, you want to convey a message. And then you think about the types of message that you could convey, and you think about all these different things, and then you tap into your intuition, and you realize all of these different unique ways that you can bring forth and spark an emotion or tell a story. And now you have an infinite amount of your own creative, unique voice and images that you can share with the world, because you're tapping into a reservoir of your soul rather than the tiny the well of the tiny particular here, which is amazing. And it says, our soul nourishes us. We'll discover that the source of our strength is to be found in group teaching and group endeavor. A lot of these sections in this book continue to emphasize that it's not about the self. It's not about our own, that whole Darwinian, like, survival of the fittest, dog eat dog, the way that we're taught. Again, society is teaching us everything that is counter to soul growth and soul development. It's teaching us that it's very much an individual's journey, and very much that what we do to another person has no effect on us, and very much that we are entitled even to sabotage, to harm, to, snuff out, to suppress, in order to make ourselves better. But that doesn't help us grow. That slowly kills us inside. And so it's, again, these metaphors of what happens to a plant. Just think about that way. You stuff out the light on a plant, or you don't surround it, or the opposite of when you surround group plants together. I was just learning that they create their own atmosphere, that they start to help and create more growth. They stimulate each other's growth by coming together and just being in the vicinity of each other. It's fascinating. Plants can help each other thrive. Humans can help each other thrive. This group teaching and group endeavor, working together rather than in these isolated silos of consciousness, or unconsciousness, I guess you would say. So we're being trained through these teachings to live as souls, higher mind individuals, not as children to be nursed and cared for and protected in the nursery with rules and orders. Of course, there's a nursery like the nursery room where you keep a baby, but this is still like where do plants grow, in a nursery. But you can take them out of their habitat, they can still thrive. This is saying that when we're not living as souls, we're kind of like in the wild, like animals, like our animal nature. Everyone wants to convince us that humans are just animals and animalistic, and we're tuning into our animal nature, right? That's what's really pumped up in society. But when you live like an animal, when you can't be tamed in terms of even just living civilly, you need rules and you need orders. And so that's why it would behoove the system that we're in right now to keep people living as animals and not as souls, because then it justifies the actions that are taken to control and to keep things in order. but that is a childlike consciousness. And also, earlier on, when it talks about the rays, it talks about ray 6, which is the ray of devotion, love and devotion. That's passing out, because that's about the level of consciousness that an animal has when it is obedient to a master. And it just looks up and it just does whatever the master says, because it can't think for itself. But that's what separates us from animals, is our ability to think and reflect on ourselves, and to be conscious of our actions, and to analyze what we're doing, and to choose to do something different. An animal just operates on instincts purely. So we need to live not as children, but as souls. And when we do that, we derive life from the ocean of the universal, and not the tiny well of the particular. And even though we have just this little picture that we're taking, like, we don't need to take more than a little picture, which is another thing that's also about this competitive world that we're in. We don't need to take buckets and try to pull as much as we can from the universal ocean. We only need what's in our own little pitcher, nothing more than you can carry, and you find your way to that ocean and draw for you that which you need. No more than that which you need. So we're talking about staying in our own lane. We don't need more than enough. We just have exactly the right recipe for what we need. I love that Esther Hicks, Jerry and Esther Hicks, and Asking It Is Given, it teaches the metaphor of the kitchen filled with every possible ingredient that you could ever imagine. And that's what life is like. There's so many things, and you could put whatever you want into your dish, and you're just going to pick the ingredients that are going to make your unique dish that you want to enjoy. And if you're making a cake and there's olives in there and you hate olives, you're not going to sit there and just complain about the olives being in the kitchen, or you're not going to pull them off the shelf and put them in your cake. You're just going to not take what you don't want, but make sure that you recognize that you're in an infinite stockhouse that has everything available to you. And as long as you're focusing on putting what is for you and what you need in your little picture, in your little cake, then you can feel actualized, right? You'll reach that top of the pyramid. Finishing up here, this last sentence. In the light of your own intuition and illumined mind, that light developed and brought to usefulness through meditation, thinking on these things, reading these things as a meditation, take that aspect of the teaching which suits and aids you. Take what suits and aids you and interpret it in the light of your own need and growth. We're picking the ingredients for our life, for our recipe, for our mix of what we need in order to thrive. And it's a much more intelligent, enlightened way of going about life, rather than trying to look so heavily at what the next person has, or is doing, or is being, or how they're living. Because when you look a little closer, their leaves are wilting, their soul isn't thriving like the plant, like, I'm just really in plant mode right now. So I hope that this is helpful in terms of using these smaller chunks, but I think that there's so much in a section with Bailey that it's really nice to just spend longer discussing the ideas rather than trying to fill in big, massive pages and pages of text. So that's it, and we still made it to 30 minutes, so we'll see. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Take care.